Hey guys, so I'm happy I can finally show a little bit of this, and I just kind of want to show off what we've done and what we're now doing again. It's taken a long time even to get to this point, because honestly, at first we had no real direction how to do any of this, and I didn't really think there's any good guides out there to kind of walk you through the steps and learn a lot of this material. So I'd always wanted to make a game before, I'm sure like everyone watching this video has, and today I'm going to try and get you to go from kind of the first steps of making original cards on proxies or template editors, Magic Workshop, or any of those kind of things, to a full-scale game production. Now, in other videos, I've already talked about how I made the custom frame, but in this video, I'm going to talk mostly about the printing process and how to get you started there. I hope you can use my experiences to help you out, whether it's a custom small-scale stuff or if you want to mass produce your game, whatever they may be. At the start, there's a couple things we need to have figured out at this point. So some considerations are, of course, the design, your game, what are the borders, the frame, etc. How is that looking? Is that all set up properly? Do you have the correct files, whether it be Photoshop, etc.? What are you using? Adobe Illustrator, etc. And then after that, after you finish the game stuff, you also need to consider the externals. So the printing type, what are you going to be using? Digital or offset? For packaging, are you going to use a booster pack or a booster box, or are you going to have just a tuck box, or what are you going to do? So these are some of the things that you need to have figured out. Now, for Tenshoku, obviously we had our game figured out at this point, and we, for the beta set, chose to go with the tuck box, and we're actually doing that for Gamma as well. And so today I'm going to kind of focus on offset printing and go a little bit more in depth with it. The process for digital printing is not necessarily complicated, but I'll briefly go over it as well. Now, at the forefront, let me just explain first and foremost what is offset and digital printing. So offset printing is technology that uses plates, usually made from aluminum, which are used to transfer an image onto basically a rubber blanket, and then rolling that image onto the sheet of paper. It's called offset because the ink is not directly transferred onto the paper. Offset presses also run much more efficiently once they're set up, so offset printing is better used for larger quantities, and they provide really nice color reproduction and very crisp, clean, professional looking printing. Not contrast, but on the other end of the printing spectrum is digital printing, which doesn't use the plates that offset printing uses, but instead uses options like toner or liquid ink, think of like a laser printer kind of thing, to produce the images. Now, digital printing really shines in lower quantity needs. So if you only need maybe 20 decks, or you only need one card kind of thing, then digital printing is the way to go. So digital printing also has the ability to have kind of variable data. So what that means is if you have a unique code or an address or a marker on each individual card that's unique, then your only option is actually going to be digital printing, because offset can't actually accommodate that without having a second printing. So if there was a hot stamp that was done afterwards, then you could do that with the offset printing, but it wouldn't be plainly available to be printed all at one time. So of course, so offset printing is fantastic and looks amazing. Many businesses and many people don't actually need that large of a print run, and so sometimes digital printing is honestly the best solution, especially for prototyping and for just kind of testing out the experience. So what we're going to go over next is the actual offset printing process that is used by the company that I've used in the past. So as you're seeing on your screen here, the 8 steps involve paper cutting, printing, finish surfacing, cutting the cards, cutting the corners, packing the cards into tuck boxes, plastic wrapping, and cartons. So some of these obviously we'll be able to talk a little bit more than others, and some are just kind of self-explanatory, but let's go through. So first off, number 1 is paper cutting. So obviously the paper will need to be cut to size, and this isn't something that you're generally going to be involved in the process of. However, it is helpful to know the size of the paper your printing company is going to be using. The reason being is for understanding how the layout on the sheets is going to go, especially if you're going to have any kind of random distribution, if you're going to have booster packs, or anything like that. Now, in our case, Tenshoku is printed on a piece of paper that fits 6 cards vertically and 11 cards horizontally, 66 cards per page. Now, I knew I was going to have more than 66 cards, so it was going to take more than one sheet. I also knew I wanted to use the space efficiently, and both in terms of financial reasons, but also just I don't want to waste anything. So I ended up going with 132 cards, or 66 times 2. Of course, you don't need to do that. It's totally okay to have blank spaces, but again, I just didn't want to waste paper. The cost isn't that big of a deal. It's fairly negligible, but again, it's up to you. So moving into the next step, printing. Now, printing is going to have multiple phases when it's using offset, like I talked about previously. It's first going to be printed onto the rubber sheet there, and then that will be used as kind of the blanket that shows the colors for each of the layers. And so the first plate has to, of course, be created with the information of the cards, the backs, etc., and that will be placed into the machines when they're printing each side. So once that's prepared, the machine can start to print. And obviously they'll do a first print run. Once the sheets are printed, some worker will double check to make sure that the colors are good, and you'll notice on the images that there's a kind of color alignment up in the top, and that's just to make sure that all your colors are good, that they're what you selected. For those that don't know, offset printing uses the cyan, magenta, apologies, I forgot the other two off the top of my head, but it does not use the RGB color scale. So if you're making your projects, make sure that you have the correct color scale for offset printing. Now, after they've printed them out, they'll make sure everything's up to snuff, and if they're good, the rest of your batch goes through. In our case, we printed 500 sets. That was the MOQ, or minimum order quantity, and that gave us a little over 130 playsets. I thought that was still pretty ambitious given kind of the low-key nature of Tenshoku, but I was happy if I could find players that were interested, at least that many, and that'd be enough for me. I'm happy if you guys enjoy the game, and that's all. So it's not meant to be a big project, it's just kind of an out-of-pocket thing. So after that, we go to number 3, surface finishing. Now, this is something, again, that you'll have decided much earlier in the process, and we will have very little to see or do during this phase. But essentially what's happening is cards are coated in various materials, and it's a way to finish the card and protect the artwork, and honestly protect the card as well. Personally, Tenshoku and I chose to use a matte finish, but it's definitely recommended that you use samples from your individual printing company to get an idea of what their finishes are and how they look. Common options are a varnish, which gives you a shiny look, or a matte, which is kind of a dull, non-reflective surface. Because my goal was to prevent cards from being too reflective if they were ever on camera, if they were used for like showing on YouTube, that the matte finish would be much better because there would not be that reflective surface. When you introduce foil cards or other variants into your game, other options also become available to you. In addition, the paper that you're able to print on will also change depending on what kind of foil or alternate kind of cards you want to use. So, if you are using a box, it will also probably be printed at this time. If you're using a tuck box, and that will also use the appropriate finishing. Now, for the beta game, we chose to use the varnish so that the kind of crispy, clean, shiny box would contrast nicely with the matte cards. Now, in the upcoming set, Gamma, we're trying a laminated box, and so once that is ready, we'll show you guys how that looks and kind of take a look at the comparison. Number 4, cutting. So in this step now, the sheets have been printed out, they've been covered with whatever coating you've selected, and so now they're going to go through a industrial cutting machine that slices the cards up into their individual card pieces. Obviously, this process is slightly different for each factory and what machines they have available, but this style seen in this video is fairly common. Number 5, so corner cutting. Unfortunately, I don't have a great image of this, so I'll be pretty quick on this. However, there are some great channels out there that have shown how this is done. Essentially, there are blades that are set up and the cards are pushed through, and it gives them a real nice uniform kind of poker look, if that's the type of card you're going for with the curved edges I think most people associate with card games. Next up is the tuck box packaging. So for those who use tuck boxes, in this phase your cards are going to be hand packaged most likely, or depending on if you have a larger factory or not, they may be done by machine before being wrapped and sent out. This part honestly looks absolutely brutal on larger orders, and so please be kind to your printers, especially if they're doing it by hand. It's a lot of work. And you can see in this example there's quite a bit of work to be done. So the last couple parts for wrapping and for preparing, there's really not too much to say here. Your boxes and whatnot get heat wrapped or shrink wrapped and then boxed up and ready to be sent out. And then the awesome event of your stuff arriving. Now, be warned that if you are printing larger scales outside the country, you probably will have some type of import tax that you'll need to pay. And it's important to remember little things like where things were produced sometimes on the packaging of items. Now, obviously, Tenshoku was printed in Japan, printed in China, created in Japan, and so I pay a small import fee when I first get all the boxes sent to me. So, in closing, that is the entire process of getting your game made. I hope this has been, again, something that's exciting or at least interesting to check out. If you have any questions or there's something else you want me to make a video on, let me know, leave a comment. I appreciate all the feedback you guys have. I'm still working on getting a better microphone, but in the meantime, please enjoy, guys. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.